homes. Headlining that movement was the new-look Colorado Buffaloes, led by Deion Sanders. Coach Prime wasted no time bringing his Louis luggage with him to Boulder, earning the #1 spot in 24/7's transfer portal rankings. His most notable gets include the 2022 #1 overall recruit Travis Hunter, his son and quarterback Shedeur Sanders, former Kentucky running back Cavassier Smoke, and ex-USF Bowl wide receiver Jimmy Horn.
I'm just trying to introduce these young men to the other side of the country that they never thought about.
Deion's alma mater also near the top of our transfer portal rankings. Florida State comes in ranked #3, bolstering what was already looking like a playoff caliber roster in Tallahassee. Mike Norvell brought in a laundry list of proven talent on both sides of the ball, led by all-ACC corner Fentrell Cypress from Virginia and former South Carolina Swiss Army knife Jaheen Bell. Meanwhile, FSU's Week 1 opponent is right ahead of them at #2. Brian Kelly, with several reinforcements headed to Baton Rouge, headlined by former 5-star cornerback Denver Harris from Texas A&M. The winter window also saw many Power 5 programs landing new starting quarterbacks who will face plenty of pressure to perform. Sam Hartman is now at Notre Dame. Devin Leary is at Kentucky. Walker Howard and Spencer Sanders are going to compete for the starting job in Lane Kiffin's offense at the SIP. Hudson Card, he's now a Purdue Boilermaker. And Graham Mertz is likely going to be the signal caller in Gainesville. An off-season of musical chairs continues to shift the college football landscape. It's already altered expectations for next season, and the spring transfer window could give us even more movement.
Welcome into our Transfer Portal All Access show. The spring window is officially open, and we are talking about it for the next couple of hours. Who's we? We have our Transfer Portal expert, Chris Hummer, our coach, Carl Reed. I'm Emily Proud. Let's tell you what's coming up on today's show. We got a big one for you. We're breaking down all the Transfer Portal rankings. We'll recap the winter Transfer Portal window in case you forgot about some of the fun moves that happened then. Also, teams to keep an eye on during this window. And look at that, we got some big names joining the show. Florida State head coach Mike Norvell and Oregon head coach Dan Lanning joining the show literally right now. Let's waste no more time and welcome in our very special guest. It's the head coach of the Oregon Ducks, Dan Lanning. Dan, how you doing today?
Doing great. How are you guys?
Well, we're spectacular. Now that you're on this show, you might recognize a few people here on this desk. I want to get the first question in, though. I mean, we're talking about this spring window, and you're in the midst of spring ball right now. I mean, the spring game doesn't even happen until the day before the window opens, or closes, excuse me, on April 29th. So with the timing of all of this, how does that adjust how you manage this spring period?
Yeah, you adapt. I mean, I think everything about college football right now is adapt and overcome. And the expected is no longer the expected. Just be ready to shift and change as the time goes. But we've got a lot of work to do. The reality is the base of our roster is our roster right now. We'll certainly look to make additions if it fits. And if people fit our culture and our scheme, we're going to try to make our team better given the opportunity, but also feel really good about the guys that we have here right now.
Dan, since the transfer portal has really taken off, a lot of high school coaches ask me, well, what about our kids? What advice would you give the high school coaches right now and high school players on how to handle recruiting with the transfer portal looming so large?
Yeah, it's certainly a piece of the puzzle. Right now, I would tell you, some colleges are taking different philosophies. Some colleges are living in the transfer portal world, and that's really all they live in. As a former high school coach, I'm still a big believer in developing some of the talent on your roster and growing it from the ground up. I think you have to do that through the high school ranks. So I would just tell coaches to continue to push guys they feel strong about. And if a team isn't looking at their players, that means somebody else probably is. And it's going to be somebody else's reward if they continue to recruit the high school level well.
Coach, you got a really big portal success story last year. Your starting quarterback, Bo Nix, coming in and making an immediate impact. When you sell the program to prospects, how helpful is it to have that great example of somebody coming in and having that immediate success in year one?
Yeah, I think if you really look at what we did in the portal last year, you look at a bunch of guys that came in and competed to make us a lot better. We didn't have misses really in the portal. The guys that we brought in were able to help us right away. Bo's obviously a great example of that, but all I can say is the best indicator of the future is the past. And transfer portal guys that have come here have had a lot of success.
You were a part, Dan, of two great programs with Mike Norvell at the University of Memphis and then as the D coordinator at Georgia. Then this was kind of before the portal era really took off. How different is it providing culture in your program now with so many guys in and out versus the transfer portal versus when you were able to recruit guys and grow them through the program?
Yeah, great question, Carl. I think one of the biggest pieces is right now college football is year to year. When you talk about culture, it has to be something you can create some sustained success. But, you know, the 2022 team's completely different than the 2023 team. And the reality is our 2024 team could be completely different as well. So you have to do a good job of hitting the reset button. You know, when the season's over with, really making sure everybody that's on your team understands that you got to be there for the greater good. And I think it's uncommon to be a team player right now, but that's what we've done a good job of doing is bringing people in that want to be a part of our culture. And I think it's hard to change people. So don't expect to change what someone already is. The reality is you have to find people that fit you.
You mentioned culture and fit and relationships. I mean, how often do you maybe see those relationships that you built while on the recruiting trail pay dividends when these guys hop in the portal and maybe remember you and remember that connection that you made with them back when they were a high school prospect?
Yeah, before, you know, you never wanted to finish in second place. You know, now there's some benefit for maybe being second place down the road if somebody needs to change the scenery or something needs to change, you know, for them in their program. The reality is we still want to go recruit great players. And I think relationships now maybe matter more than they ever have. If you're a person that creates great relationships, then you're going to be able to tap in to, you know, have some benefit for your team down the road.
Coach, you have a spring game coming up here in 2 weeks, but the transfer portal is wide open now. How do you kind of balance those two things happening in concert with spring ball happening on one hand and also having to deal with potentially adding things to your roster?
Yeah, every day is a new day. You have to be extremely organized. And like I said, the last 3 years of college football, I think, has taught everybody to be on their feet, ready to adjust and adapt. And we felt like the preparation, the way we have our calendar set up, it was really important to focus on the people that are here on our roster currently. And then we'll worry about the additions as, you know, as the spring goes on.
Dan, when you have a great player in your program, a guy that you're excited about, but he might be a backup, and he comes into your office and says, Coach, I want to play more. If I can't play more, I want to go to the transfer portal. What are some of the things you're saying to guys to re-recruit them and keep them on your roster?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is to be honest and understand you're not going to win every battle. If you're really clear with your expectations, you're honest with your players about where they stand, sometimes they're going to leave when you're honest, and that's okay. But the reality is, if you can paint a picture for what your plan is for a player, you do a good job of having great communication. But sometimes they take a chance and say, hey, I want to stick this out and see it through. And, you know, the reality is we lean on a lot of examples of players that have played for me in the past that maybe didn't play till their junior year or senior year and then ended up getting to have great success. You know, Trayvon Walker is a great example of a guy that was a backup until his last year at Georgia, and then he became the #1 overall pick in the NFL draft. The reality is you want to have great experience on the field, and you want to go perform on the field, and you have to be in the best place to do that.
I see a lot of coaches that, you know, join their programs, they're new to their programs, use the transfer portal as a way to kind of churn their roster and have that quick turnover. Colorado, great example, 26 transfers coming in this year. You know, as you're getting your feet wet and getting a little bit more comfortable with Oregon, I mean, how do you foresee your usage of the portal being beyond that initial player turnover and that initial new coach bump, I guess you could say?
Yeah, the reality is it's something we want to work in, we don't want to live in. And we always want to enhance our program. But again, I still would like to recruit really well at the high school level and develop within the high school level ranks as guys get into our program and make it a situation when they don't want to leave if they're a good fit. On the same note, you want to make sure you continue to enhance your program. If you have a player that you think can make you better, you know, that's my job as a coach to make sure we enhance our team.
Dan, how much has NIL come into the recruiting process in terms, are guys making mistakes when they care more about how much NIL money they get as opposed to schematic fit, maybe culture fit, or even coaches that can develop them? Are they being short-sighted if they think about NIL versus what the NFL can do for you down the road?
Yeah, I think the reality is team players, much like coaches, you need to realize that doesn't solve the problem. And if you want long-term goals, you better think long-term, right? It better not be number one on your priority list. There's also a reality in college football right now that you have to have great support of your team, right? And if you have that, you have a chance to be successful. If you don't, you really don't. And luckily here at Oregon, we're able to have both, have great culture and team, develop players, and people are picking us for the right reasons, but also know that they're able to benefit off their name, image, likeness, which we love.
You utilized that first transfer portal window back in December and January to bring in 10 new transfers. How do you foresee this spring window differing from that initial one earlier this season?
Yeah, I think there'll be a little less of a reset. People kind of know where they're at, in comparison to where they've been, and a lot of these guys have already had a chance to possibly enter. I think the thing that fans maybe don't understand is there's also some transition that has to happen for you to be able to get your roster numbers in place. And it's probably one of the hardest things as a coach is to manage those roster numbers and know what it has to look like. If you want to gain players, it means you're also going to have to lose some players in the process. And that kind of naturally takes care of itself. But again, we're always going to look to enhance our program if we can and add pieces to the puzzle that make us better.
Coach, last thing before we get out of here, we've just heard in the last couple of days that the NCAA is going to move the unlimited official visits from the 5. How does that change the way that you handle official visits? How does that change recruiting when guys can now go on unlimited officials versus being capped at the maximum of 5?
Yeah, I don't know how crazy I am about it, to be honest. I feel like 5 choices is a lot of choices. If a guy goes on 5 official visits, I'd like to think they'd have the opportunity to decide between those 5 and have some success. I think it's really hard as a coaching staff to increase the amount of official visits you do when you don't have a higher allotment of official visits. So the school right now doesn't have more visits to use, but the player has more visits they can use. So what that really means is there's going to be some players at lower tiers that don't get to go on an official visit because players that have the choice to go anywhere in the nation might go on 8, 9, 10 official visits. So I don't know the thought process really necessarily behind that, what the thought was. Ultimately, you have to recruit your tail off, and for you to bat even 20%, right, on official visits is really a low mark. We want to be closer to 50%. If you come on an official visit to us, we want to be able to sign 50% of the guys that come.
Coach, does this guy recruit his tail off?
Hey, he's a recruiter. He's a legendary recruiter, great relationships with high school guys, and he was largely responsible for helping 2 programs that were very successful in Memphis and Georgia, and you can see the success that he's having at Oregon. Great recruiter, Dan Lanning is.
We'd love to hear it. Coach, thank you so much for joining us.
Appreciate you guys. Thank you so much. Thanks for the kind words, Carl. We'll see you guys later.
Thank you. Brother. Have a good one. We got a comment here from Tyler saying Dan is the most genuine, coolest coach in college football. I think we got some Oregon fans in the chat. Just a reminder, if you want to be a part of the chat, subscribe to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Also, check this out. It's in bold. You can see it in the middle of your screen. We got 50% off annual VIP memberships. For all those Oregon fans out there, Duck Territory is a great site, tons of great information. If you want all the best knowledge, go ahead and head to that website and you can get 50% off your annual VIP membership. All right, the chat is the place to be today. We'd love to hear your questions, your kind comments, hopefully any concerns you got out there. Hit us up in the chat. Also, like this video so that we know that you're watching. If you're a fan of one of these top 10 teams right here, definitely like this video because we're going to talk about your team a lot on today's show. A lot of this movement, guys, in this top 10 happened in that early winter window. We're keeping an eye on what's happening in the spring window. But as we kind of rewind and look at everything that happened back in December and January in that 45-day window, Chris, what stands out to you about those top 10 rankings? Is there a team that maybe caught your eye?
Yeah, I mean, you have to focus on Colorado, right? There's just so many of the transfers that they took. But I think we're seeing a really interesting experiment with Deion Sanders. Not only is he diving into the transfer portal, but he's building his roster on the transfer portal. We talk about Florida State, I know a team we're going to talk about a little bit more later, about building their roster that way. But Deion Sanders is at 25-plus transfers already. And a lot of his roster this year will be made up of transfers. Obviously, Travis Hunter is the #1 player in the country. And you really have to love what Deion Sanders has done early about being aggressive and turning over his roster and giving himself the best chance to win early.
I think that when you look at the University of Colorado and what Coach Sanders' plan is, Emily, he has to flip the roster that way. Colorado, not a hotbed for recruiting from a high school standpoint. When we talk about Florida State, even though they really got players in the portal, they have a great homegrown high school situation in Florida. Colorado doesn't have that. They would have been a really bad football team, 1-11 a year ago, talent very low. Because of the transfer portal and because the scholarship limit has been lifted, you have to go deep into the portal because Oregon, USC, Utah, they're not going to care about prime time. They want to come out there and they want to try to win games. So you have to flip the roster with transfers if you're Colorado.
Yeah, if you look at the rest of the Pac-12, 75% of Pac-12 starting quarterbacks in 2022 were transfer quarterbacks, and so that is a league that's been taking advantage of that portal. Deion Sanders, of course, setting a new standard. We heard him say in the opening video of this show that he's introducing Colorado in a part of the country that maybe not a lot of guys were interested in or had seen a whole lot about. He's introducing that to them, and so a way to do that, of course, is by picking apart that portal. How about number 2 on that list, Chris? LSU, what stands out to you about their portal class?
LSU, they're one of the teams that for a long time had to be in the argument of DBU. Like they fought to be there. You got guys like Tyrann Mathieu and a ton of other great DBs that have come through there. It hasn't quite been the same since 2019, 2020 when they won that national championship, but they reloaded in the portal this year. I believe they have 4 of the top 12 DBs in the transfer portal. Got a guy like Denver Harris, a former 5-star recruit coming over from Texas A&M. You have quality starting experience coming in as well across that depth chart. I really like what the Tigers did in the transfer portal at DB.
I agree with you. LSU has done a tremendous job the last 2 seasons of landing some transfers. Mekhi Wingo being a star a year ago. Denver Harris at corner. They're trying to put the bite back in the bark of DBU at LSU, and I think that Coach Kelly's done a tremendous job, him and his staff, with that.
We mentioned Deion Sanders at Colorado coming in and having that kind of first-year bump that you need to turn over the roster with a lot of transfers. At number 3, it's Auburn. Hugh Freeze stepping in and wanting to bring in his guys and bring in players that he is comfortable with, and trying to get Auburn back to what they've done before, which is win national championships. But Carl, what about this transfer portal class in particular stands out to you?
Hugh Freeze has been very, very active in the transfer portal almost immediately as soon as he jumped into the game in terms of getting the opportunity to go back into the SEC at Auburn. Is addressing needs at every single position. I think they're still in the market for a couple of guys this spring. But when you talk about it, taking full advantage of being able to use the transfer portal as a way to rebuild and not having to depend on high school guys, I think he put in a great staff, and I think that they're off to a great start.
Half the amount of transfers that we're seeing Deion Sanders bringing in, but what about this class lets you know that they're on the right track?
I love what they did along the lines of scrimmage. Auburn under, like in previous regimes, always had a great offensive and defensive line. You knew that was going to be there, and it just wasn't there for Auburn last year. They struggled to pass protect. They struggled to create pressure on the other side of the ball. And they were super aggressive filling those holes. They have 2 of the top 11 offensive linemen. And if you include if you include the center they took from East Carolina, they have 3 of the top 11 linemen overall. They also took some really good pieces along the defensive line as well, as Justin Rogers coming over from Kentucky. So they really loaded up front, and I don't think they're done along the lines of scrimmage either.
Not done yet. Good thing we have a whole new portal window opening over the weekend. Plenty of time to bring in some of those players. We are, of course, going to talk about some of the players that are available, some that could potentially become available looking ahead, but let's go ahead and continue to roll through that top 5. I got to ask about USC because I think it's very easy for everybody to look at the Trojans and say, what did you bring in on defense? What are you going to do to address the defensive side of the ball? Carl, what did they do?
Well, number one, they had to get better up front in the front 7, and they've addressed some needs there because they couldn't tackle anybody last year. When you think about USC, especially when you saw them play Tulane in the bowl game, I mean, it was just a dreadful performance for them down the stretch. So they had to get better up front defensively, and they did that. Everybody knows that they can score points. You got the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, but up front defensively is where you saw some of their biggest additions.
I'm just going to say defense is overrated for USC. What stands out to me, they brought in Marshawn Lloyd at running back, a star running back from South Carolina. I know South Carolina really hated to lose him. They brought in Dorian Singer, the top receiver in the Pac-12. I think why bother stopping people? You just score 55 a game and you can win a national championship that way.
But one day your offense is going to be off. One day you're going to play Utah
Absolutely.
and they're going to control the line of scrimmage against you, and they're going to make it really tough to stop. Caleb Williams was banged up at the end of the season a year ago. So if you're off on offense one night, you got problems if you don't have guys who can stop you.
Is this offense ever going to be off, though, with the Heisman Trophy winner coming back? You got 2 5-star wide receivers coming in tow. I mean, they just have so much firepower. It seems like I like your strategy. It sounds like fun.
They're deep. But I will say, like, getting a guy like Anthony Lucas, a former 5-star along the defensive line, Jack Sullivan coming in for Purdue, really big for Lincoln Riley. He's been one of the most aggressive coaches in the transfer portal the last couple of years, and I think they'll continue to be aggressive in the spring window as well, to add to this class and really put USC in position to not only win the Pac-12, but to potentially go to the college football playoff.
Said one of the head coaches who has been very active in the portal. How about another one? I love our friend Andrew Ivins, director of scouting here at 24/7 Sports, accidentally said on our signing day show a few months ago, calling Mike Norvell Mike Portal, and I think I think it can stick. I think we can continue to call Mike Norvell Mike Portal, because looking at what he's done, you've seen the evolution of when he initially came in and brought in a lot of transfers. Now here he is in year 4 and still utilizing it. Just 9 transfers, but the quality is there, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. Florida State, I talked a little bit about Auburn loading off along the line of scrimmage, but Florida State really did. Every single transfer but one they took is connected to the line of scrimmage in some way. Florida State has a window this year where they can not only win the ACC, but compete for a national championship. They've got a senior quarterback in Jordan Travis, who's among the best players in the country. They have a future first-round pick on the opposite side of the ball, and Jared Verse, no surprise here, those are both former transfers. And they added a ton of pieces along the line of scrimmage that are going to help the depth and the quality for this team as they try to compete for a national title.
I'm really excited about Jaheim Bell at the tight end that they brought in from the University of South Carolina, because I thought obviously Brock Bowers from Georgia was tight end 1, but I thought that Jaheim Bell has the potential also to be a first-round pick. So when you add him to what they already had on the offensive side, Emily, at Florida State, I mean, I think that he solidified himself a heck of a class led by Jaheim Bell.
Kyle Morlock, too. They brought in another 4-star tight end. There's 2 of them. One can be a little more inline, and Jaheim can split out. But, yeah, they really addressed every need they had this offseason.
Never had too many. I'm curious from a coaching standpoint, the strategy of using the portal. What's your evaluation of how, Mike Norvell is kind of revolutionized, but has shown that it doesn't just need to be that initial bump that you have when you come in to a new program? How have you seen that evolution of how he's utilized it?
He's done what he's done better than anybody, Emily, is he's filled the needs of his team. He's addressed the quarterback. He addressed the defensive line. He's addressed tight end, offensive line, defensive line. He went and got guys that fit. He just didn't go for the stars. He just didn't go for best player available. Everything that he added to his program was a positional need. It was a schematic fit, and I think that's why he had the success he had a year ago with 10 wins, and why people think that he can win the ACC and go to the playoffs this year.
Whew, what do you think about that?
I like it. I haven't put my college football playoff picks in, but I think FSU should be the.
I'm not asking you to make a pick right now. But just,
I really do. I think FSU should be the preseason favorite in the ACC over Clemson this year, and that's the first time you can say that in almost more than half a decade. It's been a long time, and I think Florida State has that kind of team.
Okay, clip that, send that all over the interwebs. Make sure that people, no, just kidding. Make sure that people know that. A lot of excitement for Florida State, so much so that we, of course, had to go straight to the source and talk to Mike Portal himself. I caught up with Mike Norvell earlier today, and here's that conversation. My pleasure to welcome in Florida State head coach Mike Norvell to our Transfer Portal All Access show. Coach, thank you so much for being here. How you doing?
Doing well. Wrapping up spring practice. We had our spring showcase on Saturday. Everything went really well. Guys competed at a high level, and we stayed healthy. For the most part. So that was it was a great weekend, and have our last practice here today.
A lot of exciting things happening down in Tallahassee. We're all talking about the transfer portal on this show. So I've got to ask, first off, I mean, this is portal window number 2. So how is your strategy for maybe this spring window differ from how you use that winter window?
Well, you always continue to evaluate, guys that are going in. Really, you continue to look at your roster. If there's any position, needs or opportunities to get better, it's things that we'll always, evaluate. But for me, I really like to emphasize, the first window, and you're trying to get guys here in January. For us, it's as much about building a team and a group of guys together that can really set the foundation of those relationships here in the spring semester. Obviously carrying that over into the summer. I mean, last year we did have a couple newcomers that joined in the summer, but it really is a unique perspective to each individual, and teams are ever changing. But for us, we're always going to evaluate it and to see if there is the right fit to come into our program here in the summer.
Definitely got to stay on your toes there. You mentioned it. You just had your spring showcase on the day that the portal window actually opened. So what has it been like balancing this window with everything else happening, everything else you're balancing in this spring window?
Yeah, I mean, it's been pretty quiet, for us, just other than focus on improving, getting better. When it comes to the guys that we had, I want to say it was 9 transfers that started up in January. We had 11 newcomers from the high school ranks that were able to come in, and so it was a good group that started for this spring semester, and now just seeing those guys and how they've grown throughout the 14 practices up till today. I mean, it's really been good, and we got a great group of young men that have come and kind of gelled in with a great returning cast that we have from last year's team. So really excited about what this team's going to be, and like I said, there hasn't been a whole lot of activity around here up to this point, other than just focusing on practice. But we'll see how the next couple of weeks go.
You certainly do not manage all of this alone. How much has adding a general manager in Derek Ray changed your eval process? How much has he helped?
No, I mean, it's been great. And, Derek is remarkable at what he does. Does a wonderful job in helping make sure that, as a big picture, approach, that we're all staying connected, and, make sure that we're efficient in the information that is out there. If somebody does go in the portal, or if something within our own roster needs to be evaluated, Derek does a wonderful job with that. We've got a great staff, within all of our personnel, wing of our program. And I think it's really helped our football team and the guys that we've been able to bring in, getting the right fits, and they've been very productive, when they come in, and not only just for the 1 or 2 years that they're here, but just making an impact for the identity of this program and what we're building.
In your first few cycles at Florida State, the portal was almost used as a necessity in order to kind of flip that roster and culture, but now in year 4, you're still finding value in it. So how have you realized that this is a recruiting tool that can continue to be used to put together a roster even after maybe that initial turnover?
Well, I mean, I think each team's going to be different, and we evaluate every position, of potential needs of what we're looking for, what fits, and then it still has to be the right young man. And everybody has a different journey to getting to this point, but collectively, as long as they all have the similar mindset, we believe that we can all gel together and continue to grow where this program is capable of going. But you look at, I'll use receiver as an example. A year ago, we signed 4 transfer receivers, and guys that Johnny Wilson, obviously had a huge impact this last year. Micah Pittman, Winston Wright, and Deuce Span were guys that we thought were all the right fit for what we're doing. We didn't sign a high school receiver 2 years ago, and now this year we only focused on high school receivers, and all those guys are returning. It's been really good for our program, and just being able to do that within each position. I think you see the balance that we've been able to have. This past year, we're about 65% high school signees, and 35% transfers. So I thought it was a good mix, and really like the foundation that we're building and how we're going through the process, utilizing the portal.
Yeah, along the lines of finding the right guy, according to our rankings here at 24/7, 3 of the 5 highest rated players in your portal class are from non-Power 5 schools. How do you evaluate players from the FCS or even the Group of 5 ranks when trying to figure out how they're going to fare versus Power 5 competition?
Well, yeah, I mean, some of it is a projection. You look at Jared Verse, a year ago was coming from the FCS level. Had great success there. had played a couple of Power 5 opponents, and we felt very confident about the skill set of what we saw when you got to know the young man, of just the drive and determination and work ethic of what it would take to make that transition and continue to grow. And I think he proved right for us, and it's really the same thing with each young man. And there's some guys that we evaluate that are playing at the Power 5 level that might not be the right fit. And so really, it's if there is a position of need, if there's something, an opportunity for us to create more competition, or to be able to continue to improve our football team, really the path and where somebody comes from doesn't matter as much. And this year we were able to get 2 tight ends that came in. James Bell, coming from South Carolina, has been remarkable this spring. So very excited, and you got to see him compete against a lot of great teams and have wonderful production. And then Kyle Morlock came from Shorter University, and obviously playing at a little bit smaller level, but both those guys have come in the spring and proved that they belong, and I think they're going to be great players for us.
I mean, how much are you able to use Jared Verse as an example of what can happen, and that you're able to make that jump up, and we will come and we will develop you and turn you into a successful Power 5 player? Do you use his success story almost as an example of what can happen?
Absolutely. And I mean, you want to be able to point to all experiences and all examples of guys that have come through the program, because it's you take Jermaine Johnson a few years ago, and you're talking about what can be. And Jermaine came, and he invested a lot of work. He believed in what we were doing, was remarkable for our team and for our program, and played himself into a first-round draft pick, and now having great success at the next level. And so then you can point to those examples, those experiences of guys that have come and done the things necessary to play at that level. It definitely helps paint the picture for the next guy coming, and they want that to be their story. And and obviously we feel like we do a great job in helping them along the way.
They're also really good players too. I mean, another little nugget from our rankings: your average grade per transfer is the highest of any team ranked inside our top 50. So how were you able to attract such high quality players from this cycle in particular?
Yeah, I mean, they're great young men that we're looking for something special, and we felt like we had a great opportunity for them to come in and compete. And that's the thing that we promise them. We promise them an opportunity to compete. We talk about the development plan. Obviously the guys that we have that they're going to be able to do it with. And I mean, this is a special place, and we've really excited about the guys that joined our program, and I think we've really done a wonderful job, not only in the player but the person. And these guys, they want to be a part of something bigger than themselves, and I think that's what makes it all work.
Now, unfortunately, it is an inevitability almost that players will transfer away. But when it comes to how you manage that roster retention, how do you limit those surprises this time of year?
I mean, it's always about open communication, and we have had some players that have left the program, and I support them in their decision and what they're doing, and sometimes it is best to look for a new situation, or maybe a better opportunity to make the impact or have the experiences that guys might want or desire. And we try to be open and transparent and very honest with what we see, the plan for improvement, the plan for growth for them here within our program. And so it's an open dialogue, and you try not to have as many surprises whenever you just address all things there together. And I still support guys that have left this program, and watch them go and work to have success in other programs. It's still there's a lot of time and a lifetime relationship that we're all going to have together.
Along those lines, the not as fun part about all of this too is you wish you could just bring in every awesome player, and you have for the most part, but it's fitting everybody in under that 85-man scholarship limit, which means there's the potential for some of those tough conversations. I mean, what are those like? You mentioned the honesty that you've got to have, but when you have to sit down and tell a player on your roster that it may be in their best interest to enter the portal and pursue other options, explain to me what those conversations look like.
Yeah, well, I mean, each journey is unique to itself, and I love talking to our players. In my exit interviews, trying to get sense of, their perspective, exactly where they are, how they foresee, the next step within our program. And, I give them my feedback. And, ultimately there's times where, guys want to have more opportunities and things, and that's all part of it. And so I encourage just the open and honest approach to it. And I think that's where we've kind of got to a really good spot. And it's never, tough conversations they're always going to be a challenge, but I think when you care about the individual and you want to see them continue to grow and be able to achieve with any opportunity that they do have, sometimes a new start is might be what's best for them. And we've been able to be the beneficiaries of guys, getting a new start in their career and having great success. And, I'm hopeful for anybody that does leave our program that they find those same opportunities, there at their next stop.
Coach, we appreciate your honesty and giving us a little peek behind the curtain into this crazy time of year. Thank you for the time.
No, absolutely. Thank you for having me on, and go Noles.
Calling all Florida State fans and really fans of any team, you can go to Noles 247, get 50% off your annual VIP membership. It's not just for Noles 24/7, it's for all team sites across our network. Definitely want to take advantage of that promotion. A lot of great nuggets on there. You've of course got the message boards where things can get a little interesting. Speaking of message boards, we got a similar thing going here in the chat right now. We got a lot of great analysis. Our friend Clint Brewster, who is a part of the rankings team, he puts together all of these rankings. He is answering your questions in the chat. The only way you can be a part of it, though, is by subscribing to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Make sure you're doing that. Also, hit that like button, guys. I think that's all the things that I needed to say, so I'm going to let you two speak here. We're taking a look at some of the players that have already entered the transfer portal here in the spring window, but as we've discussed with the coaches that we've had on the show, as I've talked to you guys about a little bit, this spring window is a little bit different than what we saw in the chaos that was the December window. Carl, from your standpoint, how does it differ from that initial 45-day window where we saw 1,200 players enter?
The winter's a lot of chaos, but it's also a lot of star power involved when you think about what happened. Quarterbacks, receivers, skill guys, and a ton of coaching changes. The spring is a little more laid back. It's more about positional fit than it is about trying to go find the biggest NIL deal as the winter session was about. So now you just got out of spring practice and you realize that your right guard can't reach the 3 technique on inside zone. And so you have to go find somebody who can do that specific skill set. So guys have a good idea of who their roster is going to look like and who's going to be on their team, but they have some needs they have to fill. Also, at the end of spring practice, you have a lot of attrition. Guys are going to get called into the office and they're going to get told, you're not good enough to play here, or they're going to be unhappy about their role, and so they're going to move on. And so you're going to see a lot of linemen in this portal. You're going to see a lot of defensive linemen in here as well. The guys in the trenches will be the stars of this transfer portal window.
Absolutely. And I think in a lot of ways, this is not as fun to talk about. It's not as exciting as your team adding a player, but this is going to be a window of attrition. This is the time of year teams have to get under 85 scholarships. This is the time of year some coaches are going to have some really difficult conversations with their players saying you would probably have a better chance to play elsewhere. So in the Power 5 level, there's not really anticipated to be a ton of like starter quality players, but as Carl said, there are some players, especially from the G5 ranks in the portal, that you can grab. And I think this time and this window is just going to be defined by the teams that are aggressive early when these guys go in, and you fill your needs as best you can. And that's what this portal window is about. Like you plug a hole and you're too deep at offensive line, or you find an extra D lineman who can help with your depth. There are going to be a couple superstar players, obviously, and we have seen one already go in so far, but it'll be a little calmer.
Yeah, and this is the first time that we're having these two separate transfer portal windows, but in the spring last year, we did see the Blindikoff Award winner transfer in Jordan Addison. Could there be some sort of star power like that, or was that probably just a happenstance of last year?
I mean, where did Jordan Addison end up? USC, right?
He did, yes.
And I believe another company reported that Bear Alexander, a Georgia defensive lineman, is going to enter the portal, and there's a lot of USC rumors there. We saw Eric Gentry enter the portal late last year from Arizona State. He ended up at USC as well. So I think in USC we see a program willing to do what it takes to fill those holes late. That some of that's NIL and some of that's being aware of where you are on your depth chart. So I think Bear Alexander is an example of a player who could go in. And I still certainly think there are some rumors out there. I don't want to get too much into specifics on these guys because some of them end up staying, but there are some star players, places that could enter the portal. And this is a great time as a player to leverage your situation from an NIL standpoint and go to your school and be like, hey, I'm going to go in the portal unless I get X. And we have certainly seen some of that in the last 12 months.
There's definitely some star players right now that are testing the waters and sticking their pinky toes in the pool to see what kind of value they may get from NIL. Another component that we don't talk about a lot with the transfer portal, especially when you're talking about group of 5 guys and FCS guys, this is the time of year where agents are recruiting for their next draft class. They're already recruiting these guys, and there are going to be situations where agents say, if you leave this group of 5 situation or if you leave this FCS situation and go to the SEC or the Pac-12 or the ACC or the Big Ten, you could be maximizing your value in a better way. Those conversations are also happening. So that's going to have a big, big influence on what happens with some of these guys' decisions on entering the transfer portal.
I want to dig in a little bit more to this player strategy. It's so interesting to me because it's easy to look at it and say, I'm going to get a lot more eyeballs if I enter the transfer portal during this window because there's just way fewer people and so there's less competition. But then you run the risk of not having a place to go because rosters are complete, they're done, they're not taking any more players. So how do you manage maybe the player strategy side of things when you're trying to figure out which window you want to target, Chris?
I think the great thing about the spring portal window for players is you have more information. You know where you sit on the depth chart. It's been 15 spring practices in a lot of cases. You know if somebody's getting reps behind you ahead of you on the first team. You have that information. And at the same time, you've had a lot of time to put some feelers out there, see who might be interested. And we were talking off camera about this earlier. If you're a player and you're not working back channels a little bit to see who might be interested in you're doing yourself a disservice. Because if you're going into the portal without information, you risk not finding a spot. And I think the best players in a lot of these cases at least know they're going to have some offers on the table. So I think as long as a player has done their research and they're willing to leverage their situation a little bit, you can really take advantage and shine any time when there's not a lot else out there.
Another great thing about this period is you have more, the coaching moves have settled down. So if you would have left in the winter, head coaches were still moving, coordinators were moving. There's guys that went in the portal and their position coach was gone a week later. So now you know, at least when I go into this season, I'm going to have the same position coach for at least a season. So I'm able to work with the guy that actually recruited me. And so I think that is a big thing that matters, Emily, also as you go down the stretch of this part of the process.
Yeah, it's like what Chris said. You overall have more information. You can do the math on the depth chart and see where you might fit in somewhere. You also know who your head coach is going to be, who your coordinator is going to be. So there's more information, but there's also, a little bit more risk that comes with this as well. And also speaking about the spring transfer portal window, spring games. We just talked to Dan Lanning about it. Their spring game is set for April 29th. That is the day before the portal closes. A lot to manage right now. Over a third of FBS programs are planning on having their spring games this weekend. And guys, the portal is already open. So we talk about the chaos that was December. There's a new set of chaos that comes with this. So these spring games, the way that they're figured out, there's a lot of things that go into it. But essentially, these coaches can dictate when they are. It's not a set in stone thing. It's not like this season where you have games on Saturdays, or if you're in different conferences, you have them on different days. This is something that you can adjust. Is there a perfect time to have that spring game now with this portal window open? If so, what is it?
I think this year was new to everybody because this is the first year that you're doing the spring transfer portal period. Also, when you think about the spring game and how it affects the team, I don't think that this is something that affects the top 10 or 15 teams in the country. All those teams that you listed there, those Power 5 guys, they have huge recruiting departments. So while the coaching staff is coaching those guys in spring ball, the recruiting and the personnel departments are making contact and cutting film and watching guys and making sure everybody's prepared and recruiting. I think it's a killer for group of 5 schools. I think it's a killer for Power 5 schools that are at the bottom of their league and spending financially, and maybe they don't have some of the, it's going to come down to the haves and the have-nots in terms of how much it affects you.
Absolutely. And I think you could just really, there's so many ways you can take this. Michigan's spring game has been done for
They've
weeks.
been done for forever.
So they have the ability to look at their depth chart, and they have weeks to kind of plan what they need to do in the portal and attack it. Oregon has a much later spring game, which also has its advantages because you can have the last spring game in the calendar, and you can bring in as many high school recruits as you want and make that a showcase for yourself. You give yourself a platform and have the best chance of having as many players on campus as possible. So it just depends on what your priorities are. If your priorities are getting out of spring healthy, giving your players a longer rest, get ready for finals, and address your portal needs, like you can go early. If you want to go late and have a platform to show as many recruits your campus experience as possible, and that's what's important for you, you have the option to do that. And the calendar, the way it sets up, gives you the flexibility to do so.
Interested to see if there will be any adjustments made for next spring when you learn about how everything worked. You asked Dan Lanning about this, the unlimited official visits too. Do you bring in official visitors for potential transfer portal targets for these spring games? I mean, it's just a lot to manage right now, and so I'm interested to see what will happen as we learn through this first iteration of the two-window system, as we'll call it. Let's talk about some of those players, though, and take a look at our transfer portal rankings. The top 10, top 20 guys will probably remain fairly unchanged through this window. We're not expecting those major players that will hop into the portal, but you do have some news here, Chris Hummer. What you got for us?
Absolutely. Texas, fresh off its spring game, actually just picked up a pretty big commit in Minnesota defensive tackle Trill Carter. Trill had already visited Texas. He also visited Arkansas. He had several really big offers. And Texas, which had a need along the defensive front on the inside of the line of scrimmage, just got a really good potential starter or depth piece for that line of scrimmage. And Texas wants to rotate along their defensive front, and Trill's going to be a huge piece for that unit as they head into 2023. Texas had to get another defensive lineman, and they got one in Trill Carter, one of the best ones in the portal.
Big pickup for Texas. Bo Davis is a legendary defensive line coach, has developed a lot of NFL guys, especially some great guys on the interior. Big loss for Minnesota. They've lost a few guys here recently in the transfer portal on the defensive side of the ball.
But this is just like an example of the type of player that's available in this transfer window. You're going to have a couple Power 5 players out of the portal, and if you're aggressive in recruiting, you can really feel a need on your team, and Texas did that. And now Texas's defensive line, where they were worried about generating a little pressure, they were worried about the depth up front, we'll have more of it going into next year, and that's the advantage the spring portal window comes with. You can fill holes in your roster, and Texas did so in a huge way with Trill Carter.
Yeah, they can breathe a little bit easier now, and taking a look at some of those defensive linemen that are available, we'll go position by position. That takes a big chunk out of the guys that are available. Not a whole lot right now, so Texas, good on them for going ahead and taking advantage of that. Again, let's look at some of those transfer portal rankings. A lot of these guys are from that first window and will remain largely unchanged because, again, we're not going to have a ton of those guys jumping in, those top 10, top 20. Again, I mentioned everybody that's working on some of those rankings. You can check that out online at 247sports.com. Look at this, guys. You might recognize a lot of those names, and they've already found their new home, so not a whole lot of changes here. But as we, again, take a look back at what we saw come out of the initial transfer portal window, what do you remember about tracking these guys and when these guys hit the scene in terms of what that did to the transfer portal market, Chris?
Well, Travis Hunter was probably the worst kept transfer secret in the world. So I just remember watching a lot of YouTube videos and refreshing on that. But guys like Sam Hartman and Devin Leary, quarterbacks are always the most interesting, but those are the type of guys who change the course of college football the next season. I'm not saying Travis Hartman isn't that guy. I think he's going to be huge for Colorado, but like Sam Hartman could make Notre Dame a playoff contender next year, and it was a huge deal when he went in the portal. I think we all kind of knew he was going to Notre Dame once he went in the portal. That was a really bad kept secret as well, but it was a huge deal when he went in. Devin Leary flirted with Auburn. Devin Leary had some conversations with Missouri, among a couple other teams, but he ended up at Kentucky. He's Will Levis's replacement. That's going to be a huge deal for Kentucky's 2023 hopes. So those are the type of guys, off top of mind, that really made a huge splash in the portal.
To me, it was so much star power on the move. Sam Hartman, like you said, he had a great career at Wake Forest, chooses Notre Dame, can completely change the trajectory of what's going to happen with Marcus Freeman in his tenure at Notre Dame. You look at Devin Leary, who came into the season as a guy everybody thought was going to be a first-round pick. Rocky season at NC State, jumps into the portal, ends up at Kentucky. So obviously with Coach Sanders going from Jackson State to the University of Colorado. Then you get to move with Travis Hunter. So a lot of star power in that class in the winter in terms of the transfer portal. And so I think that's things we're going to continue to see things like that every year at that first transfer portal window.
Yeah, from star power to guys that I'm going to call future stars, maybe some that you haven't heard of yet, but you will if they join your squad and hopefully make a big impact. And those are some of the players that are coming from the FCS ranks or the G5 ranks, and that was something that you heard me ask Mike Norvell, is how you evaluate those guys. Obviously a major success story, and seeing what Jared Verse was able to do and come in and make an immediate impact. It's not always that way. It's tough to figure out based on the level of competition how these guys will perform at the Power 5 level. But Carl, what are some of the things that you look out for when you're trying to evaluate the guys that are ready to make that jump?
I actually think it's less risk. I think that Jared Verse plays better competition at the FCS level than what guys are playing against in high school. So I think that once a guy is at the FCS level or the G5 level and he's super productive at that level, it's easier for you as a college coach to say, this guy can make an impact on us versus a guy in high school who was playing against all guys that were 180 pounds and they were 5'6". So I think it's a safer bet if I'm a Power 5 coach to get guys from the G5 level and the FCS level than it is for me to get a high school guy. And I think that we're seeing college coaches feel the same way, the way that they're going about recruiting.
Who are some guys that fit the mold? Some of the prospects that we're keeping an eye on that could make that jump?
Yeah, I think North Texas actually is two of them. And let's focus on their tight end, which is Jarquez Gums. He is one of the most productive tight ends in the country, full stop. He was a redshirt freshman last year. I think he had like about 450 yards receiving, 5 touchdowns. He's 6'3", like 230, but he's actually a really good inline blocker as well. So he can really do everything you need to. And the offense, I talked to a former UNT staffer that told me, Gums actually announced multiple weeks ago that he was going to the portal. And that staffer had probably more than a dozen calls from other schools, like Power 5 schools, asking about this guy. Our guy, Colin Kennedy, works here with at 24/7 Sports, actually reported just a little while ago that Gums is scheduled to visit Arkansas this weekend. He has offers from programs like Oregon, and we saw Dan Lanning earlier, Utah, teams that have really done well with tight ends in the past. And I think he is going to be one of the stars of this transfer portal window.
I agree with you right there. This guy is special, and it's very hard to find guys with a multi-dimensional skill set at tight end. Guys who can go out and run routes, he can flex, but like you said, Chris, he's a tremendous inline blocker. Arkansas could be a fit, Oregon, everybody's going to be after this kid, and he's going to be an instant impact from day one.
And I would also point out the other UNT player to watch out for is Cam Robertson, who is a defensive end. He was also a redshirt freshman last year. He has multiple Power 5 offers on the table for him as well. So these are two UNT guys from a really talented roster that wanted to test the waters. And this is what can happen if you're a G5 player this time of year. Like, there aren't a lot of big fish out there, and if you're the biggest fish in the pond, you're going to have a ton of offers, and these two guys are taking advantage.
Speaking of big fish, it's taken us about 50 minutes to finally talk about the quarterback position. That's because there hasn't been a whole lot of action there, but one guy in particular, Hayden Wolf from Old Dominion. You have a great story up right now, Chris, on 247sports.com. Go check that out after we're done here. Don't leave us yet. But it's all about what it's like being a transfer quarterback. And that's something that, maybe is under-discussed, in that it's one thing to hop in the portal if you're an offensive lineman or a linebacker and just finding, that fit for you or where you think you can immediately play and immediately make an impact. But for a quarterback, there's a lot of factors that you have to think about when making that transition. What were some of the things that you learned from Hayden Wolf as far as what it's like being a portal QB?
Absolutely. It's like, it has to be a scary thing being a portal quarterback. There's only 133 FBS schools now, and only one can start at every school. And Hayden Wolf had one of those jobs at Old Dominion. He was a 2-year starter there. Had a pretty solid 2022 season all around, but he spent 4.5 years at Old Dominion and thought it was time to move on. And now he not only has to consider depth charts, but unlike some other positions, like, everybody has to consider scheme, like everybody fits in a different way, but for a quarterback, it's particularly important. You have to consider your relationship with the offensive coordinator. You have to consider the receivers that are on the roster. You have to consider the offensive line. You have to consider how you fit that scheme overall. There are just so many things that Hayden talked about having to consider while he's sitting at home in Florida working out, just kind of by himself, like in a room, just trying to figure out where his best fit's going to be. And it's just really tough for quarterbacks this time of year because you're navigating not only how you fit in a scheme, but also trying to figure out, you're kind of slowly watching where other quarterbacks might be going to figure out like where your spots are going to be. Yeah, the dominoes fall. And it's particularly difficult after spring too, because a lot of these teams already have an established starter or somebody they like. So you have to really know what schools need a guy pretty badly, and that you're not just going to get told you can come and start and you'll just be a depth piece. There's a lot to consider.
Hayden Wolf can play for somebody who needs a quarterback. I got a chance to see him play a lot this season because one of my former players played for Old Dominion, so I was really tuned into them this season. I watched a big upset over Virginia Tech, group of 5 team beating a Power 5 team. I think that he's a guy that can be a tremendous fit for a few schools. There still is a short list of schools who desperately needs a quarterback that can come in and start for him. And I think that he's going to be able to play really well at that level, and he's shown at Old Dominion.
Just to tie a bow on this conversation, I think the common thought about some of these players that are trying to make that jump up to Power 5 is the mentality is different. They're scrappy. They got that chip on their shoulder. How have you seen some of these players in terms of, what's between the ears as far as when they go to make that jump to Power 5? Is there a different maybe demeanor to some of these guys that you want to coach, you want to be a part of?
They probably appreciate it a little more because they had to work harder to get there. They weren't big-time recruits coming out of high school. They weren't sought after, but they played and worked themselves into guys who can be on those rosters. You can be a guy at 18 years old that's not ready to play Power 5 football, but you might be ready by the time you're 20 or 21. And so if I'm a high school player right now, I look at some of these success stories and I say, hey, I don't want to take the attitude that I've slept on. I don't want to take the attitude that I've been overlooked or that I've been treated unfairly in recruiting. I'm going to take the attitude that I'm going to take the offers that I have on the table, Emily, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to work my tail off and become a player. And if I do those things, I'm going to be in a position to go to a P5 school. I'm going to be in a position to cash out on NIL money and put myself into a position to play in the National Football League. The work is not ending, it's only beginning.
Love that. So many things you say I just want to put on a t-shirt because they're just so inspiring.
Just like a poster on the wall behind
yes,
you.
Yes. Every time we walk into
Absolutely.
the studio, we need that on there, and it's just going to get me ready to go for every single show. We got a lot more to talk about on the show. I want some names. I'm a fan of my team, and I want to know who can come in and make a difference for me this fall. Again, though, we set this with the premise of it's a little bit slower in this spring window for sure. If you are looking for a starting quarterback, you're probably not going to immediately find that difference maker, that guy that's going to win the Heisman Trophy like we saw in the transfer portal last year. Not a Caleb Williams out there. But in preparation for this, and I'm sure that you guys were like this too, just getting ready for what this could potentially look like, I was keeping an eye on all these quarterback competitions. Some guys who might find out that they're not going to be the starter entering the fall and say, all right, well, I'm going to go try to start elsewhere. But so far, Chris, what are we seeing out of this quarterback market?
Not the strongest so far. There are some potential starters, maybe on the G5 level, like a Ben Finley leaving NC State. Like he played for them this year. I think he could be a quality option for a lot of teams. There's a chance, and I guess I shouldn't use that. That was a bad turn of phrase. I think there's an argument to be made. The actual best quarterback in the portal still is Chance Nolan, who's been there since really the winter window. He was sorting through some things with credits, but I think he's a guy that could still help a lot of teams, former Oregon State quarterback. I certainly think there will be more quarterbacks entering the portal over the next 15 days. There's some situations we're watching. But right now, not the strongest market in the world if you are one of the few, especially Power 5 teams looking to fill a hole.
This is a time where a coach has to make a decision at the quarterback position. Am I better off just developing the guy that I have, or am I going to go in a portal and get a guy that doesn't totally blow me away? And I think that that's a decision a lot of coaches have to make. I was on the phone with a Power 5 coach last week, and he's faced with the same decision. He's not overwhelmed by the quarterbacks in his room, but he doesn't see a guy that might be worth coming in and having to reteach a whole system to. You might be better off going with the guy that's got you through spring and got you through the fall a season ago.
Ben Finley is a grad transfer with 3 years of eligibility remaining. I don't know how that works, but if you're looking for a quarterback for the future, potentially be a guy. It's not just a one and done. I think of grad transfers as you get 1 year out of them, but he's a grad transfer with 3 years.
I mean, we got some 7th and 8th year players in college football this year, so you could be like 4 years to go in a graduate transfer at this point.
25 years old and still playing college football, but as somebody who is out and away from college, stay as long as you possibly can. It is a great place to be. All right, how about some of those guys that will be receiving the passes from quarterbacks if we head in there? What stands out to you about the wide receivers that are on the market so far, Chris?
Yeah, a really interesting list, I think. I would focus on two guys from the top. Gary Bryant, who's another guy that's left over from the winter window. He is a former USC wide receiver, former top 100 recruit. Our guy Greg Biggins has been all over this recruitment. He's visited Arizona, he's visited Texas A&M, but the crystal ball right now sits on Oregon. We talked to Dan Lanning earlier, and I think Dan Lanning is on the precipice of landing another receiver in Gary Bryant, going to be somebody that could really help Bo Nix and what looks to be a pretty deep Oregon wide receiver room. The other guy I would focus on is Brennan Thompson. He's leaving Texas. This is a former elite recruit. He was only at Texas for a season. I've heard quite a bit of like OU, Oklahoma, and Texas Tech scuttlebutt early with him. And I think he's somebody that next year and well into the future with somebody with multiple years of eligibility left that can really help. He is a really elite athlete for his position, great track and field times. I think given a depth chart with a little more room to breathe, Texas has a lot of receivers. He could be somebody that could really help somebody.
I was really surprised that Bryant has been in the portal as long as he has, and I didn't know what the weight was, but whoever gets him is going to get a heck of a player, a guy who can catch the ball and who can do some different things from the wide receiver position.
Yeah, those Texas guys, seems like speed is the thing that really stands out to you there. Chris, from the tight end position, not a ton of names. You mentioned Gums already. What do we need to know about the players potentially available at that position?
Yeah, another tight end to watch is Khalil Brantley, who's coming from Miami. I can report he's actually visiting SMU this coming weekend. Okay. I think SMU has now taken, I think 7 is the number of former Miami players.
They are a top 10 transfer portal team. So
yeah, they have done.
Active. But Miami?
Yeah, they have done an excellent job in the transfer portal. But like obviously, there's a ton of former Miami staffers on that staff. I actually had one staffer there earlier this year send me an SMU logo with a Miami U plugged in there because they've taken so many former Miami players. Obviously, Rhett Lashley has a lot of experience at Miami, given being the coach there. And I think this is another situation where Khalil Brantley could go to SMU and really help not only their depth, but give Preston Stone, their quarterback, some other options to throw to.
As we go through these position groups, we're slowly getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So let's go to the guys in the trenches. Offensive line, who stands out to you on this list?
Well, you want to go first with the big guy out of the University of Wyoming, and that's Emmanuel Pranon. You also have to look at Caleb Etienne from Oklahoma State and Cameron Johnson out of Houston. If you're an offensive lineman right now, baby, it is your time. Every college coach in the country right now wants an offensive lineman. Every coach that I've talked to in the last month has said, hey, Reed, if you see an offensive lineman that can play, give him my number, give me a call. You are the sexiest guys in the world right now. If you're an offensive lineman and you can play football, there's a starting spot somewhere for you in the Power 5. There's an NIL deal somewhere for you. You are the stars. Don't let anybody tell you different. Big guys, it's your time.
You agree?
I can't even follow that.
I mean, that's amazing.
I mean, big guys, it's your time. I love it. I agree.
I love a t-shirt.
If you're facts, I would buy that. If you were an offensive lineman and you're not considering your options right now, you're doing yourself a disservice because everybody needs an offensive lineman. I'm not trying to give coaches a headache.
These coaches are coming at you.
I'm not trying to give coaches a headache, but it's a fact. Like, this is your opportunity. You're gonna have every offer in the world. You're gonna have every NIL consideration in the world. More specifically on some of these offensive linemen. Let's start with Willie Tyler. He's an offensive lineman from Rutgers. He was their starting right tackle this year. He's got 5 official visits set up. He's already visited Temple, Syracuse, Mississippi State, and Arizona State. He's taking a visit to Louisville very soon. He's expected to decide pretty quickly after that. He is somebody that's been a lot of places and is a really experienced plug-and-play tackle. Cortland Ford, who left USC, is a former starter for them. He started several games at tackle. I would watch Kentucky with that one. There's a lot of early buzz there. Cameron Johnson, who Carl mentioned from Houston, former first-team All-American Conference tackle, is fresh off a visit to Missouri. He's visiting USC this upcoming week, and he's also scheduled to see Arizona State. Arizona State obviously needs some more offensive line help based on these conversations. And Colorado, another team looking to plug some holes. So he is a popular player right now for sure.
How valuable is a guy like Caleb Etienne and the fact that he has so much playing experience already? Is it rare to see that? I mean, just looking at some of these guys, you don't see a lot of minutes that they've put in.
Yeah, Caleb Etienne is somebody who played over 1,000 snaps for Oklahoma State last year. You also just don't find a lot of 6'7", 330-pound people who move the way he does, which is why he's so popular. There's a ton of teams that really need a quality starting left tackle. I mean, like, even Ohio State really needed a tackle during the winter window. They didn't get it. This is not me reporting, but this is me more speculating. Like, Ohio State could be a team for Caleb Etienne because, like, there's a lot of connections to the Oklahoma State staff there. And I think Caleb's going to have a ton of offers because he is a high-profile tackle who played pretty decently well last year. And he might not be a starter for some teams, but he could certainly plug a hole in the depth chart.
Well, if you saw the speed numbers from the edge rushers in the NFL Combine, then you know how valuable a left tackle is like this, who can play and who can block those guys. You can get your quarterback hurt if you don't have a high-profile tackle. And it goes back to what I just said in the last segment. If you're an offensive lineman like Eddie and you can play, he can sit back and he can pick the school he wants to go to. Anybody in need of a tackle, which most everybody is going to want this guy.
Yeah, we've discussed the evaluation of some of these smaller school guys. Pregnone is one of those guys that would be coming from Wyoming. How ready is he to take that next step to a potential Power 5 school?
Oh, he's ready. If you see the way he comes off the ball, the way he handles the run game and the power offense that Wyoming played this year. He's physical. He's powerful. He plays with great leverage. He's a great hand striker. He bends very, very well. Athletic enough to get it done. Plays great in space and in tight spaces. I think that he's going to be a remarkable player for whoever gets him.
I just want to expand on Emmanuel for a second. And just what it's like to be an offensive lineman. He went in the transfer portal Saturday afternoon. I was at Texas' spring game. I got a couple texts from like people in the player personnel space within an hour saying like, have you seen him? Like, he's going to be a dude. And I was a little busy at the moment. I passed it along to our transfer rankings team. They all liked him. And then like within about 24 hours, he had more than a dozen like Power 5 offers. Like, it happens so quickly if you're an offensive lineman of that caliber. And it could go from like 1 or 2 player personnel people seeing you, 1 or 2 offers go out, and then everybody else is going to jump on an offensive lineman of that quality because everybody needs one right now. I know we've said that a lot. It's a big guy hour here. I love it. And it's just important to stress that if you're like on either side of the line of scrimmage and you can play, like, you're going to be a priority.
Listen, man, all of you 6'3", 6'4" power forwards in high school, go find your football coach. You want to play offense? If you want to get paid, everybody listen to me. If you want to get paid, you want to make money, learn how to play the offensive line, Emily. All you big guys, I keep telling you, it's your time. It's nothing like being an offensive lineman. It's nothing like getting recruited at that level. Everybody needs you to play. It's an unbelievable position to be in, and they're giving money right now to guys who can play that position at a high level.
Before we move on to the defensive side of the ball, one more guy I want to get a little bit more info on is Cameron Johnson. What stands out to you about him?
His ability to move his feet. He's been very well coached. He's very athletic. And Dana Holger's offense, what he's asking his offensive linemen to do, playing standing up so much, having to block guys in space, especially when you know they're passing. He's as athletic and twitchy as any lineman. He has some athletic attributes that we talk about mostly when we're talking about defensive linemen. Plays incredibly well against guys that are athletic pass rushers. I think he's going to bring a lot of value to whoever he goes to play for.
Chris, what's the early interest level there with him?
Pretty significant. He's already visited Missouri. He's going to visit USC this coming week. He's also scheduled to see Colorado and Arizona State as well. So he is a popular guy. You don't get a lot of first-team all-conference guards in the portal, and he is certainly somebody that everybody's interested in.
Not too shabby. We got a solid group of offensive linemen already in the portal, and thanks to the great pep talks here from the guys at the desk, I have a feeling that there's going to be a lot more because they're watching and they're saying, Carl Reed and Chris Hummer are telling me that I need to enter the portal. That's where I'm going to get paid. That's where I'm going to go to my dream school. All of these
I will
things.
say, on that thought, like, a big reason we're not seeing a ton of star quality in the portal this time around is like a lot of these guys, especially offensive linemen who are in high demand, like go to their collectives and get it done before they even enter the portal. That's an important part of this process. There's been negotiating behind the scenes for months for some of these guys to make sure they're locked up. I use this example a lot, but I reported it last year. Like this time last year, Texas wide receiver Xavier Worthy had a 6-figure offer on a table from somebody else. He went to Texas and Texas locked him up, and he's still in Austin. And those type of conversations are happening across the country. And I think we've seen collectives be a little more organized this time around, which is why you don't see a lot of elite offensive linemen and elite edge rushers under the portal, because those guys are so important that schools prioritize locking them up.
A lot of guys driving around in F-150s right now that play on the offensive line in college football. A lot of big dealers.
I mean, if I'm an offensive lineman, I'm getting an F-350. I got to get that extra space.
Yeah. 150 is not big enough. I got you. No, I mean, I like that we're not shying away from those conversations, because this is very much a part of it too. And so it's good that we are acknowledging the fact that NIL and in the market and using, this transfer portal window as potential leverage too is something that is very much happening, and so it's good to get that kind of look inside. So we're recapping some of the guys who have already entered the transfer portal window, because it's been open for a couple of days, but we're also tracking live breaking news and things that are happening today. We got an update already from Chris Hummer. I just want to roll through a few things that we've seen so far. Chris, again, telling us that Texas landing Trill Carter, the defensive tackle out of Minnesota. He's got an 88 rating. We already got ratings there. Look at our ratings team. They're moving so quickly. Former Tennessee quarterback Harrison Bailey is transferring from UNLV, looking for school number 3. Oregon cornerback, the former top 75 recruit Jalil Tucker, also hitting the portal there. And then Mississippi State wide receiver Marquez Dortch, who is a former top 150 player, hitting the portal. And so things are happening fast and furious, but we're going to continue to roll through some of these players that have already hit the portal. And a defensive lineman, we mentioned him again, Bear Alexander. This is probably as good as time as ever to give you just some fun facts about the portal and how it works. The SEC is unique in that you cannot transfer. They have made their own individual rule, which is totally possible for some of these conferences to do so. You cannot transfer within the conference this time of year. So with Bear Alexander potentially hitting that portal, he's not going anywhere else in the SEC. You mentioned USC as a potential target. What do we need to know more about this defensive tackle?
Yeah, I mean, we saw it in the national championship game. He had 2 sacks. Like, this is a guy who can play. Like, Georgia definitely didn't want to lose him. I sometimes question leaving Georgia to go in the portal to go somewhere else, but like, Bear, once he's officially in the portal, is going to be as popular a name as there is out there, because they don't make a lot of people his size that can move the way he does with the power that he has it. I think USC is certainly a key suitor. Rusty Manziel from our Dogs 24/7 site was the first guy to mention USC. He's totally locked in on Georgia, and I've certainly heard USC from a few other people as well. Once Bear is officially in the portal, there will certainly be some other teams interested. I've heard, like, for example, Oklahoma would love to get a number into Bear Alexander. Texas just took care of its DT need, but there are certainly some schools across the country that need a defensive lineman of that caliber, and he's going to have some options for what will be his 6th school in 6 years.
Please, no, I'm sorry, Carl. Please explain that.
Yeah, Bear, who's a DFW, Dallas-Fort Worth area native, played for 4 high schools in his high school career. He was at Georgia last year as a true freshman, and now he's looking for school number 6.
My goodness. I hope this one sticks.
So, I mean, he's well-traveled. He's used to adjusting to schemes.
He is,
He's a plug-and-play guy, so there's definitely a lot of interest in Bear Alexander.
I think Bear Alexander, I was surprised to see him leave Georgia. You think that when you think about what they've put out defensive line-wise, you would think you're in the best position you can be in the country. Obviously, he's looking for something out there, and I don't see any shortage of people outside the SEC who will want to take him. A lot of guys need defensive tackle help. We mentioned USC. He would be a plug-and-play guy for them, would be a day-one starter on their defense.
Chris, how about this group of linebackers? We talked about some of these FCS players making the jump. How about J.D. Davis? That name sticks out to me.
Yeah, coming from Jackson State, a ton of Jackson State players in the portal for some reason this offseason. I'm just kidding. Obviously, there's a coaching change this year.
I think I know why.
And J.D. Davis is another guy who's on Colorado's radar. He's scheduled to take an official visit to Colorado very soon. But J.D. Davis is just like an interesting story. This was a guy in high school that had Dabo Swinney walk into his high school. His coach pulled him aside and said, "Dabo, loved your tape, but when I told him your GPA, he just walked away." Because this is the guy who didn't have the GPA to get into an FBS school. He said he totally changed the way he looked at academics in his life. He went to Hutchinson Community College, won a national championship there, went to Middle Tennessee, played well for a year, ended up at Jackson State. And now he has offers from Oklahoma, he has offers from Texas A&M, Colorado really wants him. There are a ton of schools that really like J.D. Davis. He's a linebacker who can flow on top of a defense. really good sideline to sideline speed, and somebody that in just a couple of years has gone from playing at Hutchinson Community College in Kansas to potentially going to Texas A&M or Oklahoma or Colorado. And it's a really cool story. And he is one of the more popular players in the portal right now.
I think he's going to be an immediate impact player for wherever he ends up going. Obviously, visiting Colorado, I would assume that they're the favorite for his services.
A couple connections to Colorado.
A couple connections to Colorado. I got a chance to see him live and in person this year, and I mean, he is a guy that strikes you. He's a guy that runs well and comes right after you. I think he's going to have a tremendous impact on the next level.
I should have also mentioned, he already visited Kentucky. That official visit is done. So he's officially visited Kentucky and Texas A&M so far. He's going to visit Colorado, and I would not be surprised if Oklahoma eventually got a visit as well.
Okay, good to know. Another player going through a coaching change at Cincinnati, Jaheim Thomas. What do we need to know about him?
Yeah, really interesting player. First of all, like, he's a Cincinnati guy. He turned down Ohio State, Alabama, and a couple other big schools to stay home back in 2020. So this was an elite 4-star recruit. Cincinnati won that battle. And I know Cincinnati didn't want to lose him to the transfer portal this time. There's a ton of teams that need kind of an edge rusher, like outside linebacker combo. He plays that position. I would probably watch for Wisconsin early. Obviously, there's a big connection to Luke Fickell there. But I also think he is a player that a lot of bigger schools can come in on. So he is somebody I think is going to be very popular this transfer portal process. But at least early on, I would watch the Badgers.
No surprise here. Coaching change here. Luke Fickell goes to Wisconsin, and Luke Fickell is a defensive-minded guy, and you bring in Coach Satterfield, who's more of an offensive guy. So it's not a surprise to me that he changed. And although he did stay at Cincinnati over going some other places, I think it's important to realize that Luke Fickell is a legend in Cincinnati, born and raised Ohio guy, one of the legendary athletes to come through that state. And so I think the connection there is very strong. Wouldn't be surprised at all to see this guy end up at Wisconsin with Coach Fickell.
Along those lines, it's easy to connect the dots when you do have those coaching changes and guys, following Deion Sanders to the next move or following Luke Fickell to Wisconsin. But how much can you take into consideration what went down during their high school recruitment process? Because it's easy to just, if he reopens the recruitment again, how much are we able to kind of connect those dots with some of the interest that they might have had when they were going through this recruiting process?
I think those relationships are very important, and I don't think that they can be discounted at all, whether it's following the coach who recruited them or whether it's going to a guy that they might feel like, hey, I should have gave this guy a chance and went and played for him in the beginning anyway. You build tremendous relationships with recruiting. The high school coach builds tremendous relationships as well. So I think a lot of times when you see guys moving, a lot of the time they're going to somebody that they know, even if they didn't play for a guy they built a relationship with during the recruiting process.
Yeah, but it does make it even harder when those guys too that they recruited went to different schools as well. It's a lot of dots that you need to connect. When we're talking about Colorado, you got to talk about defensive backs, and a Colorado defensive back actually doing the opposite though has hit the transfer portal. And Nico Reed, what does the interest level and the market for him look like early on, Chris?
Yeah, Nico was one of Colorado's better defensive players last year. He's obviously in a tough defensive back room when you got guys like Travis Hunter entering. But he's going to have some options. Like, a lot of schools really need DBs, and I think he's going to get some Power 5 looks. I haven't had a chance to talk to Nico directly, but I know talked to some people kind of in the scouting area of college football that really like him. And I think he's going to be a Power 5 player. Like, he's the type of player that can really help you next year, and I don't think he'll be short on options.
Who else in this DB availability should we keep an eye on?
Yeah, I would look at Josh DeBerry from Boston College. He's another one of those guys that's been in the portal for a long time, but he has some really big offers in front of him. He's got visits set up to A&M, Ole Miss, Wisconsin, and Arkansas. So he is somebody that is coveted. All of those schools need defensive back help, and he would be a huge add for all of them. We're still waiting on some other DBs, I think, to enter the portal overall, like a good group. But Anthony Wilson, for example, from Georgia Southern is another guy to keep an eye on. He has a pretty long interest list. He's scheduled to visit Louisville, another team, looking for defensive back help, but he's also had teams like Tennessee reach out to him, along with more than a dozen other schools. So, most positions right now, if you can play, you're going to get interest, and Anthony Wilson's one of those guys from Georgia Southern who's gotten quite a bit of it so far.
Certainly. We'll take this time to remind you again of this awesome promotion that we have going on right now. If you are a college football fan, obviously, probably, if you're watching the show, you're a fan of college football. Your team, you can get all of this coverage for 50% off the annual VIP memberships. That is where you're going to get information that you can't find anywhere else for your individual team. So make sure to take advantage of that. I know that I am very happy with my annual VIP membership. I love going on the message boards and just seeing the chaos that ensues there. I love getting the behind the scenes information that you don't get if you just have the regular membership. So be sure to take advantage of that opportunity. Also, go to 247sports.com. We're talking through a lot of what you can also read about and read more information. There's also the transfer portal tracker. So when a guy hits the portal, we'll tell you about it immediately. You can go through the transfer portal ranking, see how your team is doing, see some potential guys that are available or guys maybe that are leaving your program, just so you can keep tabs so you don't show up in August and go, who is that guy? Who is that guy suiting up for my team? We will get you ready to go on all of that. We're going to continue to talk about some of these programs that might be in need of adding some of that transfer portal help. We mentioned quarterback competitions throughout college football, and if some of those guys might hit the portal. I look at a program like Auburn, and there's a lot of transition that's going on right now. We know that they have been in the market to bring in a potential quarterback. There's been some rumors around Grayson McCall, and if that's something that the Coastal Carolina quarterback could end up being able to transfer. But Chris, when we look ahead to what Auburn's needs are and where they can potentially fill them in this portal window, what stands out to you as maybe that priority number one?
Yeah, I mean, Hugh Freeze said the quiet part out loud earlier this spring. They need a quarterback, and they're looking to upgrade the position. Obviously, Robbie Ashford is still there, started part of 2022. But if you're Hugh Freeze and you're in year one and you're at a program that is not patient, like you'd like a more certainty than potentially what Robbie Ashford brings you. Even though I think Robbie Ashford might be a pretty decent fit for what Hugh Freeze has done before. So Auburn certainly could use a quarterback. Where that comes from will be interesting. With the way the rules are set up, you can't take another SEC transfer, so you got to get a little more creative with that. Auburn also needs another offensive lineman. They're trying to be pretty aggressive there. So that's a team to watch. I think Auburn, frankly, will be willing to upgrade at almost every position. They are desperate need of edge rushers as well. So I think you will see Auburn be one of the most aggressive Power 5 teams in the second transfer portal window.
I agree with you on that. I think that Auburn has to make some improvements across the board. But can you win in the SEC without a quarterback who can deliver the goods on offense? I think it makes it really tough with some of the defenses that you're going to be facing, Emily.
Another SEC school that will not be able to take an SEC transfer is Florida. They already brought in a transfer quarterback in Graham Mertz from Wisconsin, but could still be in the market for them. I know a lot of this is speculation on who could eventually hit the portal and then who could eventually maybe have interest in Florida. But what do you know about Florida's interest in adding a guy in that room, Chris?
Yeah, Billy Napier obviously said they will look to explore a transfer portal quarterback. Frankly, I've actually heard, I know it didn't look good in the spring game, but I've heard pretty positive things about Graham Mertz all spring. So this could simply be a depth addition because, Florida also has another quarterback on its roster, Jack Miller, that I think would like a chance to play at some point, and maybe he potentially explores leaving, and then Florida's left with, I believe, one scholarship quarterback. So this might not just be about Graham Mertz. This might be a little bit about filling out the room. If you have a chance to upgrade on Graham Mertz, I would certainly do so. There might be opportunities, but right now the portal market for quarterbacks looks pretty barren, and unless somebody pops that's better than Graham Mertz, which I don't think there's a ton of quarterbacks out there that are an immediate no question upgrade over Graham Mertz. Graham Mertz still might be the guy for Florida.
And then you have to look at it too. How many quarterbacks are signing to come be a backup? Those quarterbacks that are leaving, they want to play. So they're looking for situations they're going to play. If you don't have a guaranteed starting spot for me at quarterback, and I think you're going to go with Mertz, then I don't know if I can go there anyway.
Yeah, it's all about that gathering intel and information and trying to figure out if it is going to be an automatic situation. And you're coming in, a little behind the 8 ball when it comes to missing all of that spring time and spring game and all those practices. And so it is something that you've got to take into consideration. On the other end of things, Ole Miss does not have a quarterback problem. They got all the quarterbacks in the world, just stockpiling them. Lots of great talent there, bringing in a couple transfer quarterbacks. Spencer Sanders is the one that we're keeping our eye on too, because he was the last one to join the fold. So you assume that that means that he feels pretty confident about his ability to win that quarterback battle, but it's not up to him. It is up to the head coach and the people and the powers that be. So when you're looking at this Ole Miss quarterback room, should we potentially keep an eye out for somebody that might hit the portal at some point when you have this plethora of talent available?
I think players want to play. So I do think that they have multiple guys and they have one position. So I do think that you have to pay attention to that situation and see who wins the job versus who wants to stay, and are you willing to stay as a backup? But I think that we've known over time, and we've been shown consistently over the years, that the quarterback position is the one position where guys haven't been willing to sit on the bench and wait.
If a guy in that loaded room were to hit the portal, who would it be?
Frankly, I don't unless something happens.
There are rules too that makes it difficult for some of these guys.
Unless something happens with a waiver, I don't know if anybody can. Like Walker Howard can't leave. Like he just transferred in, obviously, and he's not going to leave. Jackson Dart's already transferred as an undergraduate, so unless he graduates, he can't leave. And I think it would take a waiver for Spencer Sanders to leave as well. Some of this stuff gets really complicated from rules, and I've frankly gotten different answers from different people when I've asked about Spencer Sanders' situation particularly. There's been a lot of noise around how good Jackson Dart has looked this spring, and Spencer's been battling an injury. And I think Spencer definitely went into Ole Miss with the expectation he could be the starter. I talked to him after he announced for Ole Miss, and he was very confident about it. But when you're not healthy and you're facing an incumbent starter, it's not always as easy as it might seem. Walking into that room as a confident guy. So I don't know if Spencer Sanders can get out, and it would be a really compelling question if he tries to, because he is one of the most well-known quarterbacks in college football, and I don't want to say he's in purgatory because he's still in the middle of competition and things could shift. We still have plenty of time to go until Ole Miss plays its first game. But I think the Ole Miss quarterback room has been as fascinating as it's been all offseason. I think it could be even more fascinating in the future, depending on how things break.
Yeah, and once again, the two teams we mentioned before talking about all the quarterbacks in Ole Miss's QB room, that being Florida and Auburn in need of quarterbacks, cannot get any of the guys from this room because, once again, SEC players cannot transfer within their conference during this spring window. Talk about all the crazy rules that we got to keep track of. But speaking of Spencer Sanders, the program that he left in Oklahoma State had kind of a mass exodus earlier in the winter portal window, losing a lot of guys, but also bringing a lot in. We mentioned Caleb Etienne, another guy losing their starting left tackle entering this spring portal window. Chris, what positions of need are there still for Oklahoma State?
Yeah, Oklahoma State, frankly, has done, I think overall, given the large quantity of losses they had, have done a pretty good job replenishing that roster. Honestly, talking to people around that program, the word's been pretty positive. I know Caleb Etienne entered the portal, and that came to a surprise for a lot of people there, but I think the program's feeling pretty good. It's an approachable schedule for Oklahoma State. I think if Alan Bowman works at quarterback, the former Texas Tech starter who went to Michigan, sat for 3 years and is now there, likely to start. If he works out, I think Oklahoma State could be pretty decent. But even Caleb Etienne leaving, they have a ready-made replacement for him on their roster in Dalton Cooper, who came over from Texas State. So I think Oklahoma State roster-wise is in pretty decent position. You'd obviously like to add one or two more receivers after the amount they lost this offseason, but I don't think it's the sky is falling in Stillwater right now.
Earl, who's a program that you think could potentially be active in this spring window? I'll call him a buyer versus a seller.
I got to go with Purdue in the Big Ten. I think that Ryan Walters has done an excellent job, number one, putting a great staff together, and number two, already addressing recruiting needs. When you're talking about getting Hudson Card as your quarterback, and that's one of the first things that you look for as a quarterback. So I think that Purdue settled their quarterback situation with getting Hudson Card. Now, when you're talking about what are your needs still, you still need depth along the offense and defensive line. Like I said earlier in the show, guys are going to be in the market for a lineman. Purdue is definitely going to be in the market for offense and defensive linemen. Also potentially going to be in the market for a big-time receiver or the best receiver available in the transfer portal. It might even be some junior college guys that qualify late that they could get active with. And even though you got Hudson Card, everybody needs somebody to back somebody up because you're one play away from having to play the number 2 quarterback.
Oh yeah, they have that new head coach transfer portal needs for sure. Purdue, though, adding Charlie Jones, right? Around springtime last year, that was definitely a difference maker at wide receiver. So there could potentially be some hope for them. How about TCU? They went to the national championship last year, still have some holes to fill on that roster. What stands out to you about where they could potentially be buyers in this portal market?
Yeah, I think TCU is a really interesting reference point here because we're talking so much about quarterbacks and starters, but TCU actually desperately needs a backup quarterback. They lost several quarterbacks to the portal this offseason. They lost out on a couple transfers like Walker Howard to other schools. So they need somebody to back Chandler Morris up. So that's a team that needs a backup quarterback and needs somebody who's comfortable filling that role or potentially looking forward to the future and starting after Chandler Morris goes. I know TCU could use another defensive lineman, especially along the edges. They could use another wide receiver. They could maybe use another cornerback. So this is a team that I think is in pretty good shape as overall, but if you're hoping to contend again, you have to kind of continue to plug those holes. And Sonny Dykes, a coach who's been as aggressive as anyone in the transfer portal, is going to use this window to hopefully do so a little bit more to get that roster in shape to the point where they can compete for another Big 12 championship. That Kansas State obviously won, but be in the mix for it, yes.
Appearance.
Yes.
So that's what we'll call it there. Go ahead.
I will say, speaking of teams with needs, and this is the stuff that can happen during spring ball. If you're a subscriber to the Big Spur, you've seen a little bit of this, but South Carolina's starting left tackle is a bit in question after an injury during the spring game, Jalen Nichols. And if you get that injury late in spring, South Carolina is suddenly in the left tackle market potentially, and South Carolina also needs a running back. So these situations are pretty fluid even this late in the year, because if you get an injury at a bad time, you got to fill a hole. And now South Carolina might be needing to fill a hole at tackle, and this is the type of stuff that can happen as we enter the transfer portal and as things get deep. You're going to lose sometimes a player you're not expecting to.
Everyone is in the market, as you guys said, for a left tackle and for some of those offensive linemen. Guys, we've been through so much today. We've answered, a lot of questions that are out there in terms of what this spring portal window could look like, might look like very early on in the process. We'll continue to cover this and continue to keep track of all the things as they happen. We are, of course, your headquarters for the transfer portal. I mean, it's Transfer Portal All Access. This is your backstage pass to everything that is happening in this window. But before we say goodbye, I want to just get your final thoughts and maybe some things that we learned today or something that you want to leave with people before we go on. Carl, final takeaway.
My takeaway today is offensive linemen rule the world.
I knew it.
Everybody wants to talk about all of this throwing the football and 5-star receivers and tailbacks and all that. You can't live in a world where offensive linemen are not in charge. Big fellas, get active, check your value, see where you at, because there's a lot of business out there to be had if you're an offensive lineman.
And I would add, and I mean, big people rule the world, and I'm glad to see it. And I would want it on a t-shirt. But I would add, it might seem a little slow right now compared to the winter window, but we're not close to done. And since we started today, we've had 25 to 30 players enter the portal since we've been sitting here. So as these spring games end, you're going to see more players enter the portal. You're going to have some teams get in desperation mode and need to add a player, which can cause some movement. So, I would say buckle up. It's going to be a really interesting 12 to 13 days as the portal window approaches its end date for the year.
Buckle up. I mean, there you have it. Can't say any more than that. Thank you for joining us today on Transfer Portal All Access. We'll continue again to update you as these things happen. But if you want the real-time updates, you got to go to 247sports.com. Chris and the whole team working on these transfer portal ratings. We've already got a rating for Bear Alexander. I'll throw that out there. It looks like he's going to have a 94 rating when and if he does officially enter the transfer portal, which will put him at number 11. So there are still some high profile and some great athletes hitting the transfer portal in this window, and we are just getting started. So once again, thank you for joining us. Have a good day.